to Mito, this is Shedeur essentially saying, I'm done fighting. In every way. I'm done fighting.
Waving
with
a white flag?
I'm done fighting with the media. I'm done fighting with my coaches. I'm done fighting with Rex Ryan on Get Up. I'm done fighting with y'all on social media. I'm done fighting. Because whenever somebody brings up, like he said, like, you know, the true success is built on God and God's the one who can open all these doors. Is this Shedeur James Jones kind of just saying like,
What's going on, everyone? Look, I need to be completely straight with you right from the start because what we're about to discuss is absolutely mind-blowing in the worst possible way. The Cleveland Browns just suffered another embarrassing defeat, and the quarterback situation has reached a level of dysfunction that honestly defies all logic. We're diving deep into the numbers, the film, the decisions being made in that building, and why this entire situation is spiraling completely out of control. Trust me, by the end of this, you're going to understand exactly why Browns fans are losing their minds right now. So here's what just happened. Cleveland got absolutely demolished by New England, losing 32-13 in a game that wasn't even as close as that lopsided score suggests. This wasn't a competitive battle that got away from them in the fourth quarter. This wasn't a game where they just made a few critical mistakes at the wrong time. This was a complete and total domination from start to finish. And the most frustrating part is that it was entirely predictable based on what we've been seeing week after week after week. Dillon Gabriel started at quarterback again, despite everything we've witnessed this season, despite all the evidence mounting that this experiment has failed spectacularly, despite having another option sitting right there on the bench who could potentially change everything. Gabriel completed 21 passes on 35 attempts, which gives you a 60% completion rate. Now, before anyone tries to defend that number, let me put it in context for you. The NFL average completion percentage hovers around 65 to 67% in today's game. 60% is below average, plain and simple, and that's before we even get into the quality and difficulty of the throws he was attempting. But the completion percentage is just scratching the surface of how bad this performance actually was. Gabriel threw for 156 total yards. Let that sink in for a moment. 156 yards in an entire game of professional football. That's averaging less than 4 yards per attempt, which is absolutely atrocious production that would typically result in an immediate benching in any organization that values winning over ego and stubbornness. For perspective, successful NFL offenses expect their quarterback to generate at least 250 to 300 yards through the air in today's pass-heavy league. Gabriel didn't even crack 200 yards. He was more than 100 yards short of what you'd consider baseline acceptable production from an NFL starting quarterback. Here's where it gets even worse, and this is the part that should really alarm everyone in that organization. Gabriel threw 2 interceptions, and these weren't fluky plays where the ball deflected off someone's hands or a defender made an incredible athletic play. These were terrible decisions, forced throws into coverage, the kinds of mistakes that suggest a quarterback who either doesn't understand what he's seeing pre-snap or doesn't trust his arm to execute the throws his brain is telling him to make. Both interceptions completely killed any momentum Cleveland tried to build, and essentially ended any realistic chance they had of making this game competitive. Now, Gabriel did technically throw 2 touchdown passes, so his final stat line shows 2 touchdowns against 2 interceptions, which on paper might look somewhat balanced. But anyone who actually watched this game knows that's completely misleading and doesn't tell the real story at all. Those touchdown passes came during garbage time when the game was already decided, when New England's defense had shifted into prevent mode and was playing soft coverage specifically designed to keep everything in front of them and run clock. These weren't impressive throws that required elite arm talent or exceptional decision-making ability. They were essentially layups that almost any quarterback in the league could have completed in that situation. When you examine the receiving statistics, you get an even clearer picture of what was actually happening on the field during this game. Fannin Jr. finished with 6 receptions for 63 yards, which might sound like a decent performance until you understand how those numbers were accumulated. It was checkdowns, man, constant checkdowns, short passes behind the line of scrimmage or within 5 yards of it, dump-offs when Gabriel couldn't find anyone open downfield, safety valve throws when any hint of pressure arrived. This is the kind of ultra-conservative, scared to push the ball downfield quarterback play that makes opposing defenses laugh because they know exactly what's coming on every single snap and can defend it with their eyes closed. Dillon Gabriel is simply not an NFL caliber starting quarterback at this stage of his development, and anyone with functioning eyes who watches him play can see that immediately. This isn't me being harsh or unfair or letting emotions cloud my judgment. This is objective reality based on film study and performance evaluation, maybe with several years of coaching, a perfect system fit, and elite weapons that can create significant yards after catch. He could develop into a capable backup, but right now in Cleveland, with these expectations and this roster, he's completely overmatched and overwhelmed by what NFL defenses are showing him. We already know exactly what's coming next because we've seen this movie play out multiple times throughout this season. Kevin Stefanski is going to step up to that podium, face the assembled media with that defeated look in his eyes, and unleash a whole arsenal of carefully prepared excuses to explain away Dillon Gabriel's lack of production and effectiveness. He'll talk about missed opportunities and execution issues. He'll say they need to be better as a coaching staff. He'll mention that the other team made plays. He'll use every generic coach speak phrase that sounds somewhat reasonable on the surface, but doesn't actually address the fundamental problems staring everyone in the face. But here's what the film clearly shows, and what everyone watching with any understanding of football can plainly see. Gabriel is consistently throwing checkdowns and ultra-short safe passes, and the New England Patriots secondary was literally sitting on their heels the entire game because they already knew exactly what was coming. They didn't respect Gabriel's arm strength. They didn't respect his willingness or ability to push the ball vertically down the field. They played aggressive at the line of scrimmage, dared him to throw over their heads, and he simply couldn't or wouldn't do it. They knew the short passes were coming on virtually every play, so they could aggressively jump routes, break on the ball quickly, and eliminate even those safe throws, which is exactly what happened on those 2 interceptions I mentioned earlier. This is the inevitable result you're gonna get as long as you continue playing Dillon Gabriel in this offense. It's predictable. It's unsustainable. It's killing any chance Cleveland has to be competitive against even mediocre NFL competition. If Kevin Stefanski wants to continually play Dillon Gabriel despite all the evidence screaming that it's not working, then we're going to continually see these same results. We're going to keep witnessing this absolute mess that they're creating through their own stubbornness and refusal to acknowledge reality. Here's something that might sound completely backwards at first, but hear me out because it's actually true. It's genuinely a blessing in disguise for Shedeur Sanders to not be playing right now for the Cleveland Browns. I know that sounds insane given that he was drafted to play and develop, but think about it carefully for a moment. Consider how bad of a play caller Kevin Stefanski has proven himself to be with this ultra-conservative, check-down heavy, scared to attack offensive philosophy. Consider the fact that Stefanski is systematically exposing Dillon Gabriel week after week, showing the entire football world that Gabriel is nowhere near, not even in the same universe, as talented as Shedeur Sanders. Stefanski is doing Shedeur a massive favor right now without even realizing it. Every terrible Gabriel performance, every blown opportunity, every game where the offense looks completely dysfunctional and lost makes the contrast more obvious to everyone watching. When Shedeur finally does get his opportunity, and trust me, that day is coming whether Stefanski likes it or not, the improvement is going to be so dramatic and so obvious that nobody will be able to deny it or explain it away with coaching cliches. The offense will immediately look different, more dynamic, more explosive, more threatening to opposing defenses. The receivers will get opportunities to make plays downfield instead of catching passes at or behind the line of scrimmage. Let me be absolutely clear about something that should be obvious to anyone with basic football knowledge. If Shedeur Sanders can't do significantly better than what Dillon Gabriel is doing right now, if Shedeur can't exceed this incredibly low bar that Gabriel has established through his performances, then something is seriously fundamentally wrong with either the scouting evaluation or the player development or the entire organizational structure in Cleveland. But that's not going to be the case because Shedeur Sanders is a completely different caliber of quarterback prospect with completely different physical tools, arm talent, decision-making ability, processing speed, and leadership presence. I honestly cannot help but laugh at this situation sometimes because it's reached the point of being almost comically absurd. It's like watching a coach stubbornly insist that a Honda Civic is just as fast as a Porsche because he personally prefers the Civic, even while the Civic is getting absolutely smoked on the straightaway. The evidence is overwhelming. The results are undeniable. The film doesn't lie or have an agenda. Yet Stefanski continues making the same decision week after week, expecting different results, which, as we all know, is literally the textbook definition of insanity. Let's talk about what this game really exposed beyond just the raw numbers in the box score, because statistics only tell part of the complete story. This game exposed that Dillon Gabriel doesn't have the arm strength required to consistently attack NFL defenses vertically down the field. He can't drive the ball into tight windows in the intermediate passing game between 15 and 25 yards. He doesn't trust his ability to fit balls into coverage when receivers are only marginally open, so he takes the safe check down even when objectively better options are available downfield if he had the arm talent and confidence to attempt those throws. That's not a confidence issue that will magically fix itself with more repetitions. That's a combination of physical limitations and mental processing issues that represent fundamental problems for an NFL quarterback. This game also thoroughly exposed that Kevin Stefanski's offensive system, at least as he's currently running it with Gabriel at quarterback, is incredibly predictable and absurdly easy for NFL defensive coordinators to scheme against. New England didn't have to do anything exotic or complicated. They didn't have to bring elaborate blitz packages or confusing pre-snap coverage disguises. They simply played base defense, kept everything in front of them, eliminated the deep ball by not respecting Gabriel's ability to throw it, and forced Cleveland to try to march down the field methodically with short passes. It worked perfectly because Gabriel doesn't have the accuracy or the weapons around him to consistently execute that kind of death by 1,000 cuts short passing offense against a defense that knows it's coming and can sit on every route. The most damning part of this entire situation is how it's visibly affecting the rest of the team beyond just the one-loss record. You can see it in the body language of receivers who know they're not getting legitimate opportunities to make plays downfield and showcase their abilities. You can see it in the visible frustration of running backs who aren't getting the ball in space because the passing game can't threaten defenses vertically and force safeties to back up. You can see it most clearly and painfully in the defensive players, particularly Myles Garrett, who are playing their absolute hearts out, having historic individual performances, and watching it all get completely wasted because the offense can't score enough points to win games. There's a very good reason why the hashtag Stefanski exposed has been trending on social media platforms throughout this week. Fans aren't stupid or overreacting emotionally. They can see what's happening with their own eyes. They can compare Gabriel's performance to what they see from other NFL quarterbacks around the league every Sunday. They can imagine what Shedeur Sanders might be able to do with this same offense, these same weapons, these same opportunities, and the gap between what they're currently getting and what they could potentially have is driving them absolutely insane with frustration and anger at the decision-making process. The viral nature of Stefanski's press conferences after these losses tells you everything you need to know about how this situation is being received nationally beyond just Cleveland. People are creating memes and parody videos. They're making compilation clips of his excuses. They're comparing his defensive responses to what the film actually shows. They're generally turning Cleveland's quarterback situation into a national punchline and joke. That's not good for player morale or team chemistry. That's not good for organizational credibility around the league. That's not good for recruiting free agents or making trades or building any kind of winning culture. It's toxic and it's entirely self-inflicted through stubborn decision-making. Here's what needs to happen immediately, like this week during practice, not in some vague future timeline that Stefanski keeps vaguely referencing in press conferences. Shedeur Sanders needs to be named the starting quarterback. He needs to get every single first-team repetition in practice. He needs to have the offense specifically designed around his considerable strengths, which are dramatically different from Gabriel's glaring limitations. He needs to be given a legitimate opportunity to show what he can do with actual game preparation, actual chemistry with the first-team offense, and actual support from the coaching staff instead of being treated like an afterthought. Will Shedeur be absolutely perfect in his first start? Probably not, because no rookie quarterback in NFL history has been flawless. Will he make some mistakes and have some inevitable learning moments? Almost certainly, because that's an unavoidable part of the development process for young quarterbacks adjusting to NFL speed and complexity. But will he give Cleveland something they desperately need right now? Absolutely yes, without question. He'll give them explosive plays downfield that force defenses to respect the vertical passing game and back their safeties up. He'll give them a quarterback who can make every single throw on the entire route tree, not just the safe checkdowns and dump-offs. He'll give them leadership and swagger and confidence that's been completely absent from the quarterback position throughout this entire season. The contrast between Gabriel and Sanders isn't subtle or debatable at this point in time. It's blindingly obvious to everyone, except apparently the one person who matters most in this decision, the head coach who controls the depth chart and makes the final call. Stefanski has tied himself so completely and thoroughly to the Dillon Gabriel decision at this point that admitting it was wrong now would be essentially admitting organizational failure and catastrophically poor evaluation. That's why he keeps doubling down, keeps making excuses, keeps insisting that Gabriel just needs more time or better execution around him or whatever the convenient excuse of the week happens to be. But here's the thing about NFL head coaches and the reality they face. They don't survive and keep their jobs by being stubborn and inflexible when the evidence overwhelmingly says they're wrong. They survive by adapting, by making tough decisions, by putting the team's success ahead of their own ego and pride. Right now, Kevin Stefanski is 2-6 with a roster that has significantly more talent than that pathetic record suggests. The defense is playing well enough to win games and keep them competitive. Special teams isn't costing them victories through mistakes. It's all coming down to the offense, specifically the quarterback position, and Stefanski's completely inexplicable loyalty to a player who simply isn't getting the job done at an acceptable level. The most frustrating part of this entire situation for Browns fans who have suffered through decades of quarterback instability is that they can see the solution sitting right there on the sideline. They're not asking for some complicated scheme overhaul or expensive free agent acquisition. They're simply asking for the organization to play the quarterback they used a high draft pick on, the guy with the obviously higher ceiling and better physical tools, the player who might actually give them a legitimate chance to be competitive and win games. That's not unreasonable. That's not emotional overreaction. That's common sense football evaluation based on what everyone can see with their own eyes every single week. Every week that passes with Gabriel starting and struggling is another week completely wasted of Shedeur's critical developmental timeline. Rookie quarterbacks desperately need real game reps, actual experience, and time to adjust to NFL speed and complexity. Every single game Shedeur sits on the bench is a game he's not developing, not learning from mistakes, not improving through repetition. And for what? So Gabriel can throw for 150 yards and 2 interceptions? So Cleveland can lose by 20 points to mediocre competition, so Stefanski can protect his ego and avoid admitting he made a mistake? None of those reasons are remotely good enough to justify continuing with the current failed plan. The viral clips and highlights from this game circulating on social media tell the story better than any detailed analysis possibly could. There's Gabriel throwing behind receivers and making them adjust to poorly placed balls. There's Gabriel checking down on 3rd and long when they desperately need chunks of yards to move the chains. There's Gabriel making poor decisions under pressure instead of throwing the ball away or taking a sack. There's Gabriel's interceptions getting thoroughly picked apart on film breakdown shows by analysts who can clearly identify the poor pre-snap reads and terrible decision-making. And through it all, there's the uncomfortable reality that everyone can plainly see. Cleveland has a better option available, and they're absolutely refusing to use him for reasons that make zero football sense whatsoever. Social media has been absolutely brutal and relentless in its assessment of this situation, and honestly, rightfully so given what we're witnessing. Fans are creating detailed side-by-side comparison videos of Gabriel's struggles with Shedeur's college highlights, clearly showing the massive difference in arm talent, accuracy, and decision-making ability. They're calculating that Cleveland is essentially paying Shedeur millions of dollars to watch one of the absolute worst offensive performances in the entire league every single week. They're openly questioning Stefanski's judgment, his evaluation skills, his stubbornness, and his long-term future with the organization. The pressure is building from every possible direction, and eventually something absolutely has to give. The reality that Kevin Stefanski needs to face head-on whether he wants to or not is that his job security is directly and completely tied to the success of this football team. And right now, with Dillon Gabriel at quarterback running this offense, this team has absolutely no chance of being successful and competing for a playoff spot. The offense is too predictable, too limited, too easy for NFL defensive coordinators to neutralize with basic schemes. That's not going to magically change no matter how many times Stefanski stands at that podium and says they need to execute better or be more consistent or uses any other generic coach speak excuse he wants to deploy. The solution is sitting on the bench right now, watching, waiting, preparing for his opportunity whenever it finally comes. Shedeur Sanders represents hope for this franchise. He represents potential and possibility. He represents the chance that this season doesn't have to be a complete waste and that there's actually something to build on moving forward. He represents the possibility that Cleveland's offense might actually be exciting to watch instead of painful, that the team might score more than 13 points against beatable opponents, that fans might have actual legitimate reasons to believe in the future instead of just enduring yet another lost season in a long history of disappointing seasons. At this point, the question isn't whether Shedeur Sanders should be starting. That question was definitively answered weeks ago when it became crystal clear that Gabriel wasn't the answer to their quarterback problems. The question now is how much longer Kevin Stefanski's stubbornness and wounded pride will prevent him from making the obvious move that literally everyone else in the football world can already see needs to happen immediately. How many more losses is he personally willing to endure? How much more overwhelming evidence does he need that his current plan isn't working and will never work? How much more fan anger and media criticism can he withstand before he's forced to change course? The clock is absolutely ticking on this decision, and with each passing week and each additional loss, the pressure intensifies exponentially. Eventually, either Stefanski makes the change voluntarily and salvages whatever credibility he has left, or the decision gets made for him by ownership that's tired of watching a genuinely talented roster get completely wasted by poor quarterback play and stubborn coaching. Either way, Shedeur Sanders' time is coming. It's inevitable at this point. And when it does finally happen, when Shedeur gets his legitimate opportunity with the offense designed around his strengths, Cleveland fans are going to see what they should have been seeing all along this entire season. They're going to see a quarterback who can actually push the ball downfield and attack all levels of the defense. They're going to see someone who can make plays with his arm and create explosive opportunities. They're going to see an offense that gives this team a legitimate chance to compete and win games instead of being an embarrassment every Sunday. Until that day finally arrives, we're going to keep documenting these weekly disasters. We're going to keep pointing out the obvious problems that everyone can see. We're going to keep questioning the inexplicable decision-making that defies all logic and football sense. We're going to keep building the overwhelming case that everyone except Kevin Stefanski apparently already understands completely. Dillon Gabriel is not the answer to Cleveland's quarterback problems. Shedeur Sanders needs to play and needs to play immediately. The time is right now, today, this week, not someday in some vague future. Not eventually when some arbitrary development timeline says he's ready. Not when the season is already lost and meaningless. Right now, immediately, before another winnable game gets wasted and another golden opportunity disappears forever. This situation cannot continue. The evidence is overwhelming. The results speak for themselves. The fan frustration has reached a boiling point. Something has to change, and it has to change immediately. Shedeur Sanders represents the future of this franchise, and that future needs to start now, before this entire season becomes another completely wasted year in Cleveland's long history of quarterback dysfunction and organizational failure. The time for excuses is over. The time for stubborn loyalty to a failed experiment is over. The time for Shedeur Sanders to take over this offense is right now, and everyone except the one person making the decision can see it clearly.